Get me someone who actually has a brain. Wei Zhang sneered in Mandarin.
We should.
The crystal glass flew from his hand deliberately. Water arced through the air, splashing directly onto James's polished shoes. Glass shattered against marble. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. James froze. Tray balanced perfectly despite the assault. His face, a mask of professional calm. Wei Zhang smirked, not bothering to look up. He elbowed his colleague, muttering another insult in Mandarin that triggered eruptions of laughter around the table. James knelt silently, collecting glass shards onto his tray. Eyes from neighboring tables fixed on him, some pitying, others merely curious. "Another water," Wei commanded in English. Then, with deliberate slowness, he slid his foot forward and kicked a glass shard toward James's exposed hand. "And make sure you clean properly this time." The Golden Phoenix Hotel stood as Beijing's crown jewel of luxury hospitality. 68 floors of architectural brilliance dominated the skyline, its glass exterior catching the sunset's glow like actual phoenix feathers. The restaurant on the top floor, aptly named Heaven's Court, hosted only the most elite clientele. Tonight, the Global Technology Innovation Summit had taken over the entire space. CEOs, venture capitalists, and tech visionaries from 27 countries mingled between tables draped in hand-embroidered silk. Crystal chandeliers cast diamond-like reflections across marble floors. Staff moved with practiced precision, almost invisible unless needed. A towering ice sculpture of intertwined dragons formed the centerpiece, slowly melting into a glowing blue pool where rare lotus flowers floated. Each table featured a small digital display showcasing the evening's 7-course menu, with wine pairings from vineyards most people would never even hear of. The air carried hints of truffle oil, Sichuan pepper, and wealth unmistakable, undeniable wealth. Conversations flowed in dozens of languages, most centered on billions being moved, merged, or multiplied. Security personnel in tailored suits maintained discreet positions near exits. Their earpieces occasionally flickered with blue light when they received communications. This wasn't just dinner. It was a battlefield where alliances formed, competitors sized each other up, and deals worth more than the GDP of small nations were casually proposed between sips of 30-year-old scotch. In one corner, Japanese tech giant Hiroshi Tanaka was deep in conversation with Silicon Valley's newest unicorn founder. By the window, European investment partners discreetly photographed presentation materials left carelessly exposed on a nearby table. And at the center of it all, the most coveted table with the best view of the Beijing skyline sat Wei Zhang and his inner circle. James Turner moved between tables with the practiced grace of someone who'd mastered the art of being present, yet invisible. At 28, he wasn't supposed to be here. Not serving drinks to billionaires. Not anymore. 5 years ago, he'd been the rising star at Columbia University's linguistics department. Full scholarship. Published papers on computational language acquisition. Trilingual by 20, with a natural gift for phonetic patterns that his professors called once in a generation. Then his mother's diagnosis came. Stage 4, no insurance. James withdrew from his PhD program and took the first job that offered enough money for her treatments. One job became 2, then 3. Hospital bills consumed everything. She'd fought for 18 months before passing. By then, James had lost his academic momentum, his apartment, and nearly his hope. All that remained was a mountain of medical debt and his unfinished dissertation. Beijing wasn't his first choice, but the teaching position at the Language Institute paid well. The hotel job came later. Double shifts that left him exhausted but financially solvent for the first time in years. He'd saved enough to re-enroll in his doctoral program next semester, completing his work remotely. Few knew that beneath the practiced smile and perfect posture of a high-end server lay a mind that could process linguistic patterns most computers couldn't track. Fewer still knew he spent every spare moment in the university library, working on his dissertation about cross-cultural communication patterns in multinational business settings. The irony wasn't lost on him, serving the very executives he was studying. Each shift provided fresh material, the way American CEOs leaned forward when interested in a deal, the subtle finger-tapping of Japanese businessmen when impatient, the specific Mandarin phrases Chinese executives used when discussing competitors. James kept mental notes on everything. His notebook, filled with observations, waited in his locker for break time. This conference was research gold, if he could just avoid trouble and keep his head down. His mother's voice often echoed in his mind. Your greatest asset is that people underestimate you. Let them. Watch. Learn. Then show them exactly who you are when the time is right. Tonight, he had no idea how right the time would become. Wei Zhang didn't merely enter rooms, he conquered them. He strode into Heaven's Court precisely at 7:30, flanked by 6 assistants who moved in perfect synchronization. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Power recognized power. At 42, Wei had built China's largest AI infrastructure company from nothing. Fierce, brilliant, and notoriously demanding, his reputation preceded him like a shockwave. Engineers fought to work for him despite rumors of 16-hour workdays and public humiliation for those who failed to meet his standards.
Mr. Zhang, your usual table is prepared, the maitre d' said with a deep bow.
Wei nodded without eye contact and continued toward the center of the restaurant. 2 assistants immediately began arranging his tablet, notebooks, and 3 smartphones on the table. Another adjusted his chair to the precise height he preferred. The head sommelier approached with a rare vintage already decanted Wei's favorite. James, assigned to Wei's section tonight, watched this choreographed display of deference from near the service station. Senior staff had warned him, perfect service or don't bother coming back tomorrow. Wei settled into his chair like an emperor taking his throne. With one sharp gesture, he dismissed the sommelier mid-sentence and scanned the room, his eyes calculating who was worth his attention. "Let's begin," he announced to his team. James approached Wei's table with practiced precision. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is James. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Wei didn't look up from his tablet. "Water. Still, not sparkling. No ice." "Certainly, sir." "Would anyone else?" "Everyone wants the same." Wei cut him off. "And bring the baijiu." "The 50-year Mao Tai, not the inferior one they tried serving last time." James nodded, retreating efficiently. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Wei's team arranging documents and pulling up complex schematics on tablets. One assistant looked particularly stressed, frantically switching between files. When James returned with the water and premium baijiu, Wei was deep in technical conversation with a man introduced only as Director Liu. "The quantum encryption algorithm is failing during stress tests," Wei said in Mandarin. $3 billion invested, and your team can't solve a basic coherence problem?" Liu wiped sweat from his brow. "We've brought in experts from Singapore, but the decay rate in the qubits is—" "Excuses," Wei interrupted, switching to English as James placed the drinks. "If we can't announce a breakthrough at tomorrow's keynote, our stock drops 15%. He returned to Mandarin once James stepped back. "The Americans claim their system maintains coherence for 82 milliseconds. We need 100 minimum." James poured the baijiu with steady hands, mentally translating every word. His dissertation focused on exactly this kind of code-switching the linguistic power play of changing languages to exclude certain listeners. Throughout the first course, a delicate arrangement of rare mushrooms and truffle foam, James observed Wei dominating the conversation. The billionaire alternated between English when issuing direct orders to staff and Mandarin when discussing sensitive business details. James served each course flawlessly, anticipating needs before they were voiced. He refilled water glasses before they emptied. He appeared with fresh napkins seconds after one was dropped. His movements were efficient, his presence unobtrusive.
Yet Wei never acknowledged him directly, speaking at rather than to him when necessary. The others at the table followed this lead, treating James as if he were merely another piece of the restaurant's furniture. This was nothing new. James had served enough powerful people to recognize the pattern. He remained professional, alert, and invisible, exactly as they preferred. Until everything changed. The executive dinner progressed through its fourth course when Wei Zhang's phone rang. His expression darkened as he checked the caller ID. "I need to take this," he said to his table in English before answering in rapid-fire Mandarin. James approached with the next wine pairing, a rare Burgundy specifically selected for the duck course. He moved efficiently, pouring the perfect 2-ounce taste for Wei first. Wei held up his hand abruptly, halting James mid-pour while continuing his phone conversation. The gesture was sharp enough to cause a small splash of wine onto the tablecloth. "Incompetent," Wei muttered in English, ending his call. He turned to Director Liu. The Berlin team missed the delivery window. Again. James discreetly dabbed the wine spot with a napkin. "My apologies, sir. Would you like to continue with the tasting?" Wei looked at James directly for the first time, his eyes narrowing. Then, turning to his colleagues, he switched to Mandarin with a dismissive smirk. "Zhe ge hairen xiaohuo keneng jihui shuo yingyu. Ta kan kilai xiangge bendan." "This black guy probably only speaks English. He looks like an idiot." The table erupted in poorly concealed laughter. James maintained his professional expression, giving no indication he'd understood the comment about his race and intelligence. "The wine, sir?" James asked calmly in English. Wei waved his hand. "Yes, whatever, pour it." Then again in Mandarin to his associates. "Zishi yage putao ju, ta neng nong huai shen mei?" It's just wine. How badly can he mess it up? More snickers circled the table. James poured with perfect form, his face a mask of professional detachment. When he finished, Wei didn't even acknowledge the service, turning back to Liu. "Where were we?" "Ah, yes, the Berlin failure." As James stepped back from the table, he heard Wei make another comment in Mandarin. "Zexi fuwu renyuan du shi yakxie meiyu wenhua de ren, jishi, waile zhao fangdai qian de gongzuo." These servers are just uneducated people looking for easy money jobs. James's hand tightened slightly on his serving tray. 5 years of linguistics research, 3 languages, published academic papers. He took a deep breath and walked back to the service station. The 5th course arrived, Wagyu beef with black truffle emulsion. James arranged each plate with precision, placing Wei's dish first as protocol demanded. "The chef recommends enjoying this course with the 2010 Bordeaux," James explained, presenting the bottle. Wei glanced at it dismissively. "Tai pianyi lei, zhezhong jiaqian de putao ju. Too cheap for wine at this price point." He looked directly at James while speaking Mandarin, testing for any reaction. Finding none, his lips curled into a slight smile. Emboldened, Wei continued in Mandarin to his companions. "Wodu tajidao de zui fuza de sishi xiexie." I bet the most complex word he knows is thank you. One assistant laughed too loudly, earning a sharp glance from Wei that instantly silenced him. The display of dominance established, Wei resumed his criticism of James, now speaking loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Kan tajan zainali, xiang yiji sunlian guo de gu." Look at him standing there like a trained dog. James rotated the wine bottle to display the label properly before pouring. His movements remained fluid and professional despite the growing knot in his stomach. The comments were getting worse, and with each one that went unchallenged, Wei grew more audacious. As James finished serving, Wei deliberately dropped his napkin directly at James's feet. "Ni kanta hui bu hui jianggu." Watch if he'll bend like a dog. Wei smirked, making a subtle bowing gesture with his hand. James bent down smoothly to retrieve the napkin, offering it back with a slight bow. "Your napkin, sir." Wei took it without acknowledgement and turned back to his associates. "Tai hao sun lei. Jiao women shuo zhong wen. Ju nang shuo ren he women xiang shuo de hua." So well trained. As long as we speak Chinese, we can say anything we want. Director Liu, looking slightly uncomfortable, attempted to redirect the conversation. "Perhaps we should discuss the quantum encryption project." Wei waved him off. "Dai hui zai tan. Wo xiang yao kan jege putao ju kichen zinmei jiang guoze." "We'll discuss it later. I want to see how this wine servant handles our country's rules." James retreated to his serving position against the wall, maintaining perfect posture. His academic mind cataloged every insult-linguistic patterns of dehumanization, fascinating in their structure, if not in their intent. The irony wasn't lost on him. Wei was providing perfect case study material for his dissertation on power dynamics in cross-cultural communication. But academic interest couldn't completely mask the sting of Wei's escalating humiliation campaign. Wei finally returned to business matters, leaning forward and lowering his voice. The table's atmosphere shifted instantly from mocking amusement to intense concentration. "The quantum encryption issue," Wei said in Mandarin, fingers dancing across his tablet. "If we can't solve it by tomorrow's presentation, we lose everything." James, restocking the breadbasket nearby, kept his movements measured and unhurried. Director Liu opened a complex schematic on his tablet. "The problem occurs when we attempt to maintain quantum coherence beyond 75 milliseconds. The entangled particles destabilize here and here." He pointed at 2 sections of the diagram. "The Americans are claiming 82 milliseconds, Wei reminded him sharply. "Yes, but we've discovered their published paper contains a fundamental miscalculation in the decoherence compensation algorithm," Liu replied. "Their actual stable time is likely closer to 68 milliseconds. Wei's expression changed. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. Our team found this error last night." Liu zoomed into a dense formula. "The issue is in their approach to quantum tunneling compensation. They're using a linear approximation when the relationship is clearly logarithmic." James recognized the formula from his undergraduate physics electives. Liu was correct, the relationship was logarithmic, but the solution was more complex than either man realized. "This changes everything," Wei said, excitement breaking through his usually controlled demeanor. "If we correct this and demonstrate a stable 80 milliseconds tomorrow, we dominate the market," Liu finished. "But we still need to solve our own coherence issues." Wei rubbed his temples. "Our best minds have been working on this for months. What are we missing?" James carefully placed fresh bread on the table, his mind racing through the quantum physics he'd studied years ago. The solution was surprisingly simple: an application of linguistic pattern recognition to quantum state oscillations. If only someone would ask. Wei slammed his hand on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. $2 billion in development and we're stuck on a mathematical problem? The outburst drew momentary glances from nearby tables before conversations diplomatically resumed. Wei lowered his voice but maintained the intensity. "I need solutions, not excuses," he hissed in Mandarin. "Our entire quantum encryption platform launches tomorrow." James approached to clear the 5th course plates. As he reached for Wei's dish, the billionaire deliberately knocked over a water glass. For the second time that evening, water splashed across the table and onto James's uniform. "Duibuki," Wei said with exaggerated pronunciation, a mocking "sorry" in Mandarin, before turning to his assistant. "Qingge wo zhao yi ge kong ming de ren bushi zhe ge fu wu yuan." "Please find me someone smart, not this server." The assistant nodded quickly, rising from his chair. Wei continued, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Ta keneng bu jidao shenme shi liang zi jami. Ta de daksue zai nali. Keneng kong lai meiyu shangguo daksue. He probably doesn't know what quantum encryption is. Where's his university? Probably never attended one. The final comment struck deeper than the others. James thought of his mother's sacrifices to put him through Columbia, her pride at his academic achievements, the dreams deferred when illness struck. As he carefully mopped up the spilled water, James noticed the quantum formula still displayed on Liu's tablet. The error was obvious to him now. They were approaching the problem from a language perspective, not a physics one. Quantum states behaved like grammatical structures, transformative, contextual, interconnected. The solution crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. A choice presented itself. Walk away with his dignity and job intact, or risk everything to correct a billion-dollar mistake. James retreated to the service station, hands slightly trembling as he set down the tray of soiled dishes. The head waiter gave him a concerned look. "Everything all right, Turner?" "Fine," James replied automatically. "Just need a minute." In the relative privacy behind the service partition, James closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Never let them see when they've hurt you." He wasn't hurt. He was angry. 5 years ago, he'd been presenting linguistic computational models at international conferences. Now he was being treated as intellectually inferior by a man who couldn't see the obvious solution to his own problem. James opened his eyes and glanced at Wei's table. The billionaire was gesturing emphatically, frustration evident in his movements. Director Liu looked increasingly distressed. The assistant who had left was returning, shaking his head, apparently unable to find the smart person Wei had demanded. Professor Chen's words from James's first year at Columbia surfaced in his memory. Knowledge withheld helps no one. Intelligence unshared changes nothing. But revealing his understanding would have consequences. At minimum, he'd face humiliation if Wei dismissed his input. At worst, he'd lose this job, one of 2 that were funding his return to academia next semester. James checked his watch. 40 minutes until his shift ended. Just stay invisible, do the job, go home. The smart choice. The practical choice. But not the right choice. His mother had sacrificed everything so he could develop his mind, not hide it. She'd worked 3 jobs to put him through undergraduate studies, falling asleep reading his research papers even when the technical language was beyond her understanding. "Your brilliance is a gift," she'd told him during her final days. "Not using it is throwing that gift away." James watched as Wei pulled up another diagram on his tablet quantum coherence measurements, oscillating in precisely the pattern James had studied during his cross-disciplinary research on pattern recognition. Wei didn't see the pattern because he was looking for a technological solution to what was fundamentally a language problem. Quantum states communicated with each other in predictable syntactical structures. The instability wasn't random, it was grammatical. From his service position, James could see both Liu's formula and Wei's coherence graphs. Together, they revealed the complete picture. The solution would take 3 lines of code, a simple adjustment to how the system interpreted quantum state changes. James straightened his uniform and picked up a fresh carafe of water. The 6th course would be arriving momentarily. He had perhaps 5 minutes to decide. Risk everything for truth, or protect himself and stay silent. His mother's final advice settled the question. When you stand before mirrors of the future, make sure the reflection you see is someone you respect. James walked back toward Wei's table. Decision made. The 6th course, a delicate sea bass with fermented black bean sauce, arrived at Wei's table. James positioned himself precisely, serving each plate with practiced elegance. The discussion had grown more heated, with Wei switching rapidly between Mandarin and English as his frustration mounted. "We're missing something fundamental," Wei insisted, swiping through diagrams on his tablet. The coherence pattern is almost stable at 75 milliseconds, then collapses. Director Liu pointed to a waveform graph. The quantum tunneling effect creates this oscillation pattern, but we can't predict when the collapse will occur. James placed Wei's dish before him, carefully positioning it according to the chef's instructions. As he did, he caught a clear view of the formula on Liu's tablet, the one they'd been struggling with for months. The mistake was so obvious, it almost physically pained him to see it. They were treating quantum state collapse as random when it followed clear linguistic patterns, shifts in state, that mirrored how morphemes transform in tonal languages. Wei noticed James lingering slightly too long. "Something interesting on our screens, server?" he asked coldly in English. The room seemed to still. This was the moment to step back and apologize, or step forward and reveal. James straightened, making his decision. "Your quantum coherence problem has a solution, sir." Silence fell over the table. Wei's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "What did you say?" "Your approach to quantum decoherence is treating the problem as technological when it's linguistic," James continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Quantum states communicate with each other following predictable pattern shifts, similar to tonal languages." Wei's expression darkened. He looked at his colleagues, then back at James. A small, mocking smile spread across his face. "Ni hui shuo zhongwen ma?" "Do you speak Chinese?" Wei asked, clearly expecting no response. James took a deep breath. "Shi de. Wo hui shuo liu li de zhongwen. Wo yedu guo liangzi wuli shui he yuyan shui. Ni de liangzi xiaoxi swanfa yu kuawu." "Yes, I speak fluent Mandarin. I've also studied quantum physics and linguistics. Your quantum decoherence algorithm has an error." The table froze. Wei's mouth opened slightly, shock momentarily breaking through his composed exterior. The other executives stared in disbelief. James's heart pounded in his ears. He'd crossed the line. There was no going back. Then Wei recovered, his expression hardening. "A server who memorized some Chinese phrases thinks he understands quantum encryption?" He switched to English for the benefit of nearby tables. "How amusing." "Not just phrases," James replied in perfect Mandarin. "I've studied computational linguistics at Columbia University. Your quantum coherence problem is similar to pattern recognition challenges I've researched." Wei leaned back, studying James with new intensity. His eyes held something dangerous, curiosity mixed with wounded pride. "Prove it," he said simply. The tension around the table was palpable. Wei's inner circle exchanged uncertain glances, caught between shock at James's revelation and unwillingness to contradict their leader. Wei leaned forward, switching to English. "You claim to understand quantum encryption because you studied linguistics?" His tone dripped with skepticism. "That's like saying a gardener understands brain surgery." Several executives chuckled nervously. James remained composed. "Pattern recognition crosses disciplines," James replied in Mandarin. "Quantum states follow grammatical rules similar to tonal languages. Your coherence problem occurs because your algorithm doesn't account for contextual state transitions." Wei's eyes narrowed. He glanced at Director Liu, who appeared both confused and intrigued. "Zhe jishi yage fuwuyuan, ta keneng jin shui hui le yixie zhongwen juezi," Wei said dismissively to the table. "He's just a waiter who's learned some Chinese phrases." James responded immediately in flawless Mandarin. "Wo bu jin hui shuo zhongwen, erkie wo ye yu Columbia dak sui de yu yan, shui shuo shi shui wei, zhuan ye yan jiu jisuan yu yan sui he mo shi shibie, shi." "Not only do I speak Chinese, but I also have a master's degree in linguistics from Columbia University, specializing in computational linguistics and pattern recognition." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Wei's face before he regained composure. He turned to his colleagues with an exaggerated smile. How ba? Rang women ting ting jege fu wu yuan de tiankai jianyi. Fine, let's hear this waiter's genius suggestion. The mockery in his tone was unmistakable. James knew Wei was setting him up to fail publicly, expecting him to stumble when faced with complex technical details. Director Liu, however, was studying James with growing interest. You mentioned contextual state transitions, like linguistic co-articulation? Before James could answer, Wei cut in. Liu, don't waste time entertaining this distraction. He turned to James. Don't you have tables to serve? James felt eyes from neighboring tables now watching the exchange. The restaurant manager had noticed the disruption and was approaching with concern. I apologize for the interruption, James said formally, bowing slightly. I only thought the solution might be valuable. Wei's pride was clearly wounded, but something else flickered in his eyes. A businessman's instinct not to dismiss potentially valuable information, even from unlikely sources. We have the finest quantum physicists in Asia working on this problem, Wei said coolly. What could a waiter possibly contribute? Wei's smirk widened as he reached for his tablet. Since you claim such expertise, perhaps you can explain this. He pulled up a complex quantum state diagram and turned it toward James. The screen displayed oscillating waveforms with mathematical notations that would baffle most PhDs in physics. This is our coherence decay problem, Wei announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Please, enlighten us with your linguistic solution. The trap was set. Wei expected embarrassment and retreat. A server forced to admit he was out of his depth. James felt the restaurant manager hovering nearby, clearly concerned about the confrontation disrupting the elite clientele. James studied the diagram carefully. The pattern was exactly as he'd suspected. Quantum states collapsing in a predictable sequence that mirrored tonal language transitions. The issue is in how you're interpreting state changes, James said, his voice steady. You're treating each qubit individually when they actually communicate collectively, like morphemes in language. Wei's eyebrows raised slightly. Director Liu leaned forward with growing interest. Your algorithm uses linear approximation for decoherence compensation, James continued, pointing to specific sections of the formula without touching the expensive tablet. But the relationship follows logarithmic patterns, similar to how tonal languages modify meaning through contextual shifts. Liu's eyes widened. That's actually consistent with some anomalies we've observed. Wei shot Liu a warning glance before turning back to James. Theoretical observations are worthless without practical application. What specific change would you make to our algorithm? The challenge was provide an actual solution or be exposed as a fraud. James took a measured breath. You need to implement a recursive pattern recognition loop that applies linguistic contextual rules to quantum state transitions. Specifically, a modified Markov chain that treats qubit states as interconnected morphemes rather than independent variables. A heavy silence fell over the table. Liu was staring at James with undisguised shock. Even Wei seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Then Wei's expression hardened again. Anyone can memorize technical jargon. Show me exactly how this would work. Mr. Turner. The restaurant manager's voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? James turned to see Mr. Zhao, the Heavens Court manager, standing rigidly nearby. His expression conveyed a clear message. End this disruption immediately. No problem, sir, James replied professionally. He was just leaving, Wei interjected, a dismissive wave of his hand indicating James should return to his proper place. James felt the weight of the moment crushing down. His job hung by a thread. The manager's stern expression left no doubt. One more word to Wei's table would mean immediate termination. Director Liu was rapidly typing notes on his phone, eyes darting between James and the coherence diagrams. He clearly recognized the potential value in James's observations. "Your section needs attention, Mr. Turner," Mr. Zhao said pointedly. "Table 14 requires service." It was the ultimatum: return to work or clean out his locker. James needed this job. Without it, his return to academia next semester would be impossible. Years of sacrifice would be wasted. Wei's smug expression said it all. He expected James to retreat, to choose practicality over pride. For a moment, James hesitated. Then he saw his mother's face in his mind, working late nights, believing in his potential even when he doubted himself. "Actually," James said quietly to Mr. Zhao, "I need one more moment." He turned back to Wei's table and reached for a clean napkin from the service tray. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand toward Liu's pen. The director, fascinated despite himself, handed it over before Wei could object. James began writing on the napkin, quick, precise strokes forming a modified algorithm. The restaurant manager's face paled. Wei watched with narrowed eyes. Every second James spent at the table drove him closer to unemployment. But some principles were worth more than paychecks. James's hand moved across the napkin with confident precision, sketching a modified quantum state diagram alongside mathematical notations. He worked with focused intensity, aware of every second ticking by. "The fundamental error," he explained in fluent Mandarin, "is treating quantum decoherence as random noise rather than structured communication." He drew a series of wave functions, then overlaid them with linguistic pattern markers, creating a hybrid model that bridged quantum physics and computational linguistics. In tonal languages like Mandarin, meaning changes based on contextual relationships between sounds, quantum states behave similarly. Each qubit's state influences neighboring qubits in predictable patterns. Director Liu leaned closer, his skepticism giving way to genuine interest. Even Wei, despite his obvious displeasure at James's continued presence, couldn't look away from the emerging solution. James completed a modified algorithm on the napkin, elegant in its simplicity, yet revolutionary in its approach. He circled the final equation and slid it toward Liu. "Your current algorithm treats each qubit as an independent variable, but they function more like a sentence where each word affects the meaning of words around it. This modified Markov chain incorporates contextual state dependencies, allowing you to predict and prevent coherence collapse." Liu studied the napkin, eyes widening. He grabbed his tablet and quickly entered a series of calculations, testing James's theory against their existing models. The table fell silent. The restaurant manager shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to intervene again. After 30 seconds of rapid calculations, Liu looked up, face flushed with excitement. This works! The simulation predicts stable coherence at 103 milliseconds. He turned the tablet so Wei could see the results. The quantum coherence graph showed a stable pattern extending well beyond their target threshold. "It's a linguistic solution to a physics problem," James explained. "Contextual pattern recognition applied to quantum state transitions." Liu turned to Wei, speaking rapidly. "He's right. We've been approaching this from the wrong paradigm entirely. This could revolutionize our entire encryption platform." Wei's expression remained carefully controlled, but the slight widening of his eyes betrayed his astonishment. He looked at James, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. "Where did you study quantum physics?" Wei asked, his tone now lacking its earlier mockery. "I didn't, specifically," James replied. "My dissertation focuses on pattern recognition across disciplines, how the human brain identifies linguistic structures and applies them to non-linguistic problems. Quantum state transitions follow similar pattern rules to tonal language transformations." Wei picked up the napkin, studying it with new intensity. "You developed this theory as a waiter?" "As a linguistics PhD candidate," James corrected quietly, "who currently works as a waiter." A tense silence hung over the table. Wei stared at the napkin, then at James, his expression shifting through a complex series of emotions: disbelief, calculation, and finally, a reluctant respect. Director Liu was already implementing the algorithm modifications on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. The simulation confirms its stable coherence at 103 milliseconds. We'd be 25% ahead of any competitor. Wei's business instincts visibly battled with his pride. The restaurant manager hovered uncertainly nearby, awaiting some signal about how to proceed. "Your name again?" Wei finally asked, his tone markedly different. "James Turner." "And you're truly a linguistics PhD candidate? At Columbia?" "I was. I had to withdraw to care for my mother during her illness. I'm planning to re-enroll next semester to complete my dissertation." Wei's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion now, but in assessment. "And your dissertation topic?" "Cross-cultural linguistic pattern recognition in multinational business settings," James replied. "How language structures reveal power dynamics and information flow in organizations." A flicker of understanding crossed Wei's face as he realized the irony. His own behavior toward James had been a perfect case study for the very research James was conducting. Wei set down the napkin and gestured to an empty chair. "Sit." The command startled everyone, especially the restaurant manager, whose eyes widened in alarm. "Sir, our staff cannot," the manager began. Wei cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Mr. Turner is no longer serving our table. He is now consulting on a technical matter of great importance." He turned to the manager with a stern expression. "Unless you object to a billion-dollar solution being discussed in your establishment." The manager retreated with a hasty bow. James hesitated, then carefully sat in the offered chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present, particularly the other executives, who watched with fascination as their notoriously demanding leader treated a server as an intellectual equal. Wei studied James with a calculating gaze. "You understood everything we've been saying all evening. Every comment, every remark." It wasn't a question, but James nodded once. Wei's expression shifted subtly, the barest hint of discomfort flickering across his features before his business persona reasserted control. "A man who speaks perfect Mandarin, holds advanced degrees from an elite university, understands quantum physics, and can solve problems that stumped my research team." Wei's voice carried a new note of genuine curiosity. "Yet you're serving drinks and clearing dishes." "Why?" "Medical bills," James answered simply. "When algorithms couldn't save my mother, human care became more important than academic pursuit." Something unexpected passed across Wei's face, a flash of genuine understanding, quickly masked. He nodded once, as if accepting a submitted report, then turned to Director Liu. "Implement Mr. Turner's solution immediately and prepare a proper contract." Wei Zhang stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. The sharp sound cut through the ambient restaurant noise, drawing attention from surrounding tables. James tensed, unsure what was happening. Director Liu looked equally startled. "I wish to make an announcement," Wei stated, his voice carrying across the restaurant. Conversations fell silent as dozens of tech industry elites turned toward the commotion. Wei lifted his water glass, holding it high. In that moment, James recognized the same glass that had been deliberately knocked over to humiliate him hours earlier was now being raised in his direction. "Tonight, I encountered something rare," Wei began, switching to English so all international guests could understand. "True brilliance in an unexpected place." The room's attention focused on their table. James felt exposed as curious gazes swept over him, still in his server's uniform, seated among executives. "This man," Wei continued, gesturing toward James, "solved in minutes a quantum computing problem that has stalled our research team for months, with nothing but a napkin and a borrowed pen." Murmurs rippled through the restaurant. Several CEOs from competing companies leaned forward with sudden interest. James Turner holds advanced degrees from Columbia University. He speaks flawless Mandarin, a fact I discovered only after speaking quite freely in his presence. Wei's self-deprecating smile drew knowing chuckles from the Chinese executives present. I made assumptions about his capabilities based on his current occupation, Wei continued, his voice growing more serious. Those assumptions were not just incorrect, they were embarrassingly wrong. James sat perfectly still, feeling the weight of attention from the entire room. Wei turned to face him directly. Mr. Turner, I wish to publicly apologize for my behavior earlier this evening. It was disrespectful and beneath the standards I claim to uphold. The apology delivered not privately, but before the entire tech elite of Asia was unprecedented from a man known for his unyielding standards rather than his humility. Innovation appears in unexpected places, Wei addressed the room again, and those who cannot recognize talent beyond traditional packaging will miss the next generation of breakthroughs. He raised his glass higher, to unexpected brilliance and to James Turner. Throughout the restaurant, glasses lifted in response. As the dinner concluded, Wei's team gathered their materials with renewed energy. Director Liu had already sent James's algorithm to their research division, where initial tests were confirming the breakthrough. Wei dismissed his assistants with quick instructions, then turned his full attention to James. The restaurant had largely emptied, leaving them in relative privacy despite still sitting at the center table. Your solution will accelerate our timeline by at least 6 months, Wei stated matter-of-factly. The market value of this insight is substantial. James nodded, still processing the evening's dramatic turn. I'm glad I could help. Wei studied him with calculating precision. Columbia University, computational linguistics with cross-disciplinary application. And yet you're working double shifts at a hotel in Beijing. Life doesn't always follow the expected path, James replied simply. No, Wei agreed, something like genuine respect entering his expression. It rarely does for the most interesting people. He pulled out a business card, not the standard corporate one his assistants distributed, but a sleek black card with only his personal contact information embossed in silver. My company has a research division focused on AI language pattern recognition and quantum computing applications, Wei said, sliding the card across the table. We've been searching for someone who understands both fields for our cross-disciplinary innovation team. James picked up the card carefully. I'm not a quantum physicist. Precisely why you saw the solution my physicists missed, Wei countered. They were trapped in their specialized framework. You weren't. He named a starting salary that made James momentarily forget to breathe, more than 20 times his current combined income. The position includes relocation assistance, comprehensive benefits, and a research budget for your continuing education, Wei continued, including completion of your PhD. James stared at the card, thoughts racing. This is unexpected. The most valuable things usually are, Wei replied. I'm not offering charity, Mr. Turner. I'm making a business investment in exceptional talent. James considered the opportunity financial stability, return to academia, meaningful work at the cutting edge of his field. I would need to complete my dissertation, James said carefully. That's a commitment I made to myself and to my mother's memory. Of course, Wei nodded. Our education support program would facilitate that. You'd work with us while finishing your doctorate. Wei extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? James hesitated, remembering the insults from earlier in the evening. Before I answer, I have one condition. Wei raised an eyebrow, hand still extended. The culture of your organization, James said evenly. It needs to respect all contributors, regardless of their background, appearance, or position. Wei held James's gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once firmly. Agreed. That respect begins with me. James reached across the table and shook Wei's hand. Then we have an agreement. The restaurant was now nearly empty, staff discreetly beginning cleanup around them. The evening had transformed from one of humiliation to unexpected opportunity. You'll receive the formal offer tomorrow, Wei said, standing and gathering his belongings. My assistant will contact you regarding details. James rose as well, suddenly aware he was still wearing his server's uniform. I should check with my manager before leaving. Wei nodded. I've already spoken with him. Your shift is considered completed. A hint of a smile appeared, with a substantial tip. As they walked toward the exit, Wei paused. I'm curious about something, Mr. Turner. You understood every comment I made earlier this evening, every insult, yet you maintained your composure. My research focuses on how language reveals power dynamics, James replied. Your comments were actually valuable data for my dissertation. Wei laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and appreciation. Turning insults into academic research. That's a unique form of resilience. They reached the elevator, where Wei's driver and security detail waited. Intelligence is often hidden where we least expect it, James observed. Sometimes by circumstance, sometimes by our own assumptions. Wei considered this, then nodded thoughtfully. A costly lesson for me tonight, but one I won't forget. The most valuable lessons usually are, James replied, echoing Wei's earlier words. As the elevator doors opened, Wei extended his hand once more. Until tomorrow, then. James smiled. Until tomorrow. The doors closed, leaving James alone with a black business card and a future suddenly reopened. 6 months later, James stood at the podium of the International Conference on Computational Linguistics in Singapore. Behind him, a slide displayed the successful integration of linguistic pattern recognition principles into quantum computing. In the front row, Wei Zhang nodded approvingly as James concluded his presentation to enthusiastic applause. The research division James now headed had revolutionized quantum encryption, securing Wei's company's position as the industry leader. More importantly, it had pioneered a new hiring approach, seeking talent in unconventional places. A janitor with a passion for mathematical modeling now worked as a senior data analyst. A delivery driver who coded games in his spare time had become a key software engineer. A former barista with self-taught design skills led their UX team. As James stepped down from the stage, Wei approached him with a rare smile. Columbia University just approved your dissertation, Wei announced. Dr. Turner James smiled. Just the beginning. Indeed, Wei agreed. The question now is, who else are we overlooking? What hidden talents walk past us every day, serving our coffee, delivering our packages, cleaning our offices? Did this story of hidden talent and unexpected recognition touch something in you? Perhaps you've been overlooked, or maybe you've overlooked someone else's potential. Every week, PAP Stories brings you powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and inspire real change. Stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that like button if you believe talent can be found in unexpected places. Subscribe to never miss our weekly uploads of life-changing stories that reveal the extraordinary in seemingly ordinary lives. And share this video with someone who deserves to be seen for their full potential. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to recognize the brilliance others have missed. PAP Stories. Because everyone has a story worth telling.